Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us in this webinar today. Today I'm lucky enough to have two students who have recently been admitted to two of the US and indeed the world's best universities. Allie, who was accepted into Duke University in North Carolina, and Chris, who was accepted into the Ivy League University of the University of Pennsylvania. This year, these two universities reported all-time acceptance lows, with Duke reporting an acceptance rate of lower than 5.7% and Penn about 7.4%. These two Crimson students, who excelled in their academics and at their extracurriculars, are here to tell us about their journeys and how they got into two of the world's best universities, what the application involves, and how Crimson helped them along the way. So please welcome Chris and Allie. So guys, I think we'll start off with something very simple. If you two could just maybe start telling us what led you to considering the US as a possibility for your university education?
Ladies first.
So yeah, I used to live in the States when I was younger. I used to live there, gosh, it was probably from when I was about 7 to 10, so primary school days. And so after that I moved to Australia, and it basically meant that for me America was always kind of an option because I'd had that experience within the primary school system, and my parents sort of understood the education system and always kind of thought of it as, hey, that might be an option for Allie when she gets older. And as I got into high school and secondary school, I just basically began considering whether that actually was going to be a reality for me, and started pursuing options and looking at different schools, and it ended up working out in the end. So that was definitely a big help, having that sort of experience.
So you're exposed to what happened over there at an
For sure,
age.
but also I had to research it myself and make sure it was the right fit for me, and that in turn led to me applying and deciding to head over there.
Right. And what about you, Chris?
Unlike Allie, I was Sydney born and raised, so I wasn't as fortunate enough to have that all-American experience, but I was lucky enough to visit a few American universities in year 8, and that's sort of where I got a taste for it, and I sort of realised something that a lot of Australians don't really hear about, which is the US tertiary education. And on top of that, my cousin, who was 4 years older than me, had just left, and that's how I sort of heard about the US College's liberal arts program, which really interested me because I'm like one of those kids which seems to be becoming a lot more popular these days, where we don't really know what we want to do when we join a university. And in Australia, I didn't want to have to declare my major with an ATAR before I even knew what I really wanted to do or have a real taste at it. So yeah, that was really attractive to me.
Well, you might like to explain exactly what that means, the liberal arts education system in the US.
So the US liberal arts education system, it's for the first 2 years, you do a whole bunch of courses that you haven't had the chance of doing at school, such as like psychology, sports science, all those things which like different sort of courses. And at the end of the your second year at college, you then declare your major rather than having to declare your major before you even start.
Right.
So that's why I think I hope to find my passion within those first 2 years, and I think that was a big thing for me,
Yeah, which is a big difference to a lot of other education systems.
Yeah, for
exactly. So when did that sort of idea of going to the US turn from something that was just a possibility to a real focus for you guys?
I think probably when I started researching it. I think the thing about America is that I think before you actually get into the process of looking at schools and what they offer, you have this sort of preconceived idea in your head of what the schools are actually like. Like, for example, the Ivies and stuff. A lot of them have this big brand created around them, which is definitely something to consider, and they definitely are amazing schools that do deserve those brands. But for each individual student, there are different schools that will be the best fit for them.
Yes.
Not every school, just because it has such a massive name, is going to be perfect for you. And I think once I started researching and finding schools that had all of these amazing facilities and programs and also students there alongside me, I kind of realized that, hey, I'm actually really attracted to these schools a lot more than I am attracted to some of the universities in Australia, which isn't to say that they're not great universities, but I just realized that those schools were a fit for me. So it became more of a reality because I had something that I was working towards and what I understood.
Exactly. What about you, Chris? Was there a moment that you said, okay, this is what I'm going to go for?
Yeah, so the idea of going to university was always in the back of my mind somewhere. I wasn't that focused on it for the first few years of my high school career, but it was actually in this very building at the end of year 11, start of year 12, when I had an interview with a Crimson worker, and I sort of heard a lot about what I have to do, and then I sort of realized, I got quite a long way to go, and that's when I sort of really had to start focusing and planning, and that was when I decided is this for me or is it not, and am I really going to commit to this? So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point probably to bring up the importance of having parental support, right?
Oh, for sure.
Because it's one thing to have the dream, but another thing to have that family support network behind you, helping you along the way.
Yeah, for sure.
And you both had that when it came to your families.
Yeah, I think we were both very lucky in that sense that we had very supportive parents, and without them we would have been stuffed.
Oh, 100%. My dad was like one of the biggest driving forces behind my applications. Don't think I could have done it without him.
Great ideas, people.
They'll tell you the truth.
Yeah.
That is true. And the other thing is, given you're doing these applications during a very busy period with your final years of school, how did you balance that out when you were focusing on obviously what you needed to do to get into a US university, but also your Year 12 exams?
I think it's about planning.
Yeah.
Like 100%. I think you need to be able to have certain times and areas where you sit down and focus on different things. Just like the HSC and everything, it's all about balance. It's about working out specific times and periods for when you want to work on your schoolwork and when you want to work on your American applications. They're both a priority and they both do need to be deeply considered, but you need to get into the nitty-gritty and spread it all out and actually understand all the different individual parts of the application and then put it into practice as to when you're actually going to tackle them, because it makes it so much easier to understand. Because from afar, the application seems like a whole lot to do. There's a bunch of different sections, but I think once you break it down and actually find a way and a plan to approach it that's right for you, it'll become a lot easier. And also, a lot of the parts of the application relate to your passions and interests as an individual.
Yeah.
So it will also be quite easy to complete some of those areas of the applications by just, following your own passions and your own interests while you're in school.
Exactly. Chris, maybe you'd agree with this, but I have had other students say that there's something about the American application process. It's a little bit of a relief from your AGC work because it's so different.
It's different sort of work, yeah. And on top of that, I completely agree with Allie that planning is absolutely vital in the process. But on top of all that, I think you've got to stay motivated and keep your eyes on the prize, really, because it is a long time away. And if you do lack in that motivation, you will fall off. And it's something that I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is a very tough time and it takes a lot of determination, but you just got to keep the goal in mind and just keep pushing through.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about that application process for a minute. Starting with the academic section. So on top of your HSC or your Year 12 work and exams, you have to sit some standardized tests to apply to the US. So you have an option, the SAT or the ACT. Would you like to talk about which system you went with and what that involved?
So Ali and I both did the ACT, and so the ACT and the SAT are both multiple choice standardized tests that the Americans use to sort of have an even playing field across everybody across the world. So they have this standardized testing. In terms of the breakdown of the two tests, the ACT, the main difference is that it has a science section, an English, a reading, a maths, and a science section, whilst the SAT has an English, a reading, and a maths section. And I suppose that is something that looks very attractive to some types of students, but to be honest, the science section isn't that much of a science section. It's more so about interpreting graphs and data. Okay. But on top of that, the main way that I recommend to choose between the two, because the Americans judge them both the exact same. Right. They don't differentiate one between the other, because the SAT has been around for a lot longer, but the ACT is a lot more new. But the way to tell that I recommend which one is right for you is to just sit down and do one practice test of each. Yeah. And often you'll see that there is a clear disparity between the two scores, and you'll do much better in one than the other.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
But regardless, Ali, I know you have to, a lot of schools require SAT2 subject tests. So on top of your ACT, you would have had to sit a couple of 1 hour exams. So just going back there to clarify, the SAT is roughly 3 hours?
3 hours and a bit, yeah. Yes. I think the SAT is slightly longer.
Okay.
And the ACT, 30 minutes?
Yeah, not that much longer. Right. I think, as well. So going back to what you said about the subject test. Yeah. The SAT subject test, you don't have to do the SAT to sit the SAT subject test. Right. I feel like a lot of people get confused about that. Yeah. You can sit the ACT and the subject test. They're like 3 completely different entities of testing. Yeah. Right. You have to do one or the other of the ACT or the SAT, but then you also can do the SAT subject test separately. Those ones are definitely recommended, required by some schools, but highly recommended by a lot of the other ones. And generally, a lot of people end up doing 2 to 3 tests. I personally did 2 tests. I did 2. You did 2. So I think that's a good number to hit. Basically, they are definitely a little bit more challenging than the ACT itself. The ACT, I wouldn't say is comparable in terms of the intensity of the HSC. It's definitely, it's because it's a multiple choice test, it's definitely a lot less as I said, intense than the HSC is, but then also the SAT subject tests are definitely a bit more difficult, a bit more intense, and also because they focused on specific subjects, they go deeper into those subjects and have a sort of wider breadth of knowledge that you have to have in order to do well on those tests. But they do have a large spectrum of tests you can sit for those and play to your strengths while you're doing them, and they're kind of a way, I think, to show off to the college a deeper area of like the knowledge and stuff in a way that is sort of standardized, similar to the ACT and the SAT, that the college admissions officers can look at and say, hey, this kid is really talented in this area.
Exactly, and you have a choice. So if you're a student that's into physics, you can do the physics subject test.
For sure.
It adds to your application,
Exactly, or if you study a language like Mandarin or something like that, I think you can take one of those as like a language test, or like French or something like that, in the way that you wouldn't be able to do rather in the ACT or the SAT.
Exactly. So moving on to the second and very important part of the application process also is your extracurriculars.
Oh yeah.
So I think you guys can explain, but this is where the American process differs from a lot of other educational processes around the world, in that they really do want to see who you are as a full person. And part of that involves you physically putting into the application the activities and extracurriculars that you've enjoyed over the past 4 years. So tell us how you approach those, how you added them into your already busy schedule, and then perhaps how you organize them physically in your application.
I think that extracurriculars, I think it's definitely about following your passion in this, although it sounds quite cliche and some people might, be, kind of against that sort of cliche notion. I think it actually does reign very true in this whole circumstance of the American application. The extracurriculars and the way that you represent them, you have to list what one it is, put a little bit of description about what you did within it, and then list the hours and the weeks you've committed to it. So if you're just trying to do a bunch of random activities here and there in order to beef up your application, you actually only have 10 spots available and do actually have to include that time that you've actually invested into those activities. So I think the extracurricular part of the application is sort of I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's definitely a more expressive part of the application, and it definitely does something that differentiates the American application from other tertiary education systems. I think that it's an area for you to be able to sit down and show the college your specific passions, hobbies, interests, but also in a way they're definitely a reflection of the type of student you're going to be at college. So they're going to show the college whether you're going to get out and about, whether you're going to be involved in activities in the college, whether you're going to be an engaged student on campus, and whether you're actually going to take advantage of all these amazing opportunities and facilities that the college is going to offer you. So I think that that's why they're so important. It's not just what did you do with your time in high school? That's definitely an important part of it, but it's what are you going to do with your time when you get to our school?
So
what
how
type
you
of
contribute.
student? Exactly, and I think that's why they're so important, and they definitely should not be disregarded as a part of the application.
Right, and what I've heard, Chris, also is that it is important to start engaging in those kind of activities early, because I believe on the application they're looking at something you might have done in year 9, in year 10, in year 11, in year 12. So you have to show, I guess, how you've grown with that extracurricular. Would that be right?
So on the Common App section of the extracurriculars, you have to label the amount of years that you've done since year 9.
Right.
So because that's when the senior school starts for the Americans, whilst we start in year 7.
Yes.
But so I think that is a very important part actually, because it shows that someone has actually committed to these things that they're listing and what they actually care about. Whilst it's not just someone that thinks in year 12, I want to go to America, I'm going to do all these things in year 12 now, which would be very stressful.
Very difficult.
Yeah, but they can see so that shows where they see through your application and whether it's actually genuine or not, and that's a very important part. And in terms of the application, the whole application itself, it's not like Australia where you have an ATAR and you have this amount of courses that you can go to and you just pick or choose. It's sort of a thing where it's like, I think someone told me once they like to say that the academics are 40%, the extracurriculars are 30%, and then the essays, which we'll talk about later, are also 30%. But I like to look at it as like your academics really open the door for you, and then it's your extracurricular and your essays that really give character to your application, and that shows them who you really are, and that's what they really like to read about.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not.
So you would say the old adage of just study, and nothing else.
Yeah.
Beyond that, probably not being a very healthy approach to your final years of school. In this case, it's a real advantage to explore things outside of school.
Yeah, and it really gives sort of credit to those people who have done all those other things rather than just commit all their time to studying. And I think it is really rewarding to look at it like that. So I think that's also another reason why I did like the US, because they really took a whole rounded application into consideration.
Yeah.
And that's sort of my strong point, where I'm not an amazing academic, so to say, the best in the world, but I did a lot of these other things that I really think are valuable to me, and I would hope someone would appreciate that.